What's up, nerds? What's up, nerds? Goz Master here with another Magic the Gathering puzzle quest. Today's quest, Praetor Party. Who is the best Praetor from March of the Machines, and why you should be looking out for them, which you should chase, and which ones you should avoid altogether. Today's video is sponsored by me. So if you haven't already subscribed, liked, and helped the channel out, it would make a huge difference if you would hit the subscribe button. We're on our path to 1,000 subs. Help monetize the channel. It's appreciated. Let's get right into it. We got a lot to cover. This is so big, in fact, that I had to write a bunch of stuff out in advance to make sure that I got all the points I wanted to hit here. The real question is, out of all these Praetors that are available, they all have so powerful stuff, the way they all work. You cast the card, they meet a certain condition, they flip, they give a saga, they do 3 chapters, and they flip back to the creature side, so you get this endless loop of value, theoretically, that happens in the game. Challenge is, some of them are typically hard to set up. It takes a little time for you to get the full benefit of everything you're looking for, but I'm going to go through and show you which ones I think are worthwhile and which ones. Now, one of the things that I'm doing for this is I'm not actually going to be using any tricolor walkers. These are only going to be used with dual color walkers. Some of these might have better performances with using tricolor walkers, but I figured most folks are going to have dual color walkers, and it should spotlight the card powerfully enough with only 2 colors, not needing necessarily 3. With that, let's start with Elesh Norn. Elesh Norn, 11 mana, legendary, vigilance, 3/5 white Phyrexian Praetor. When an opposing source deals damage to you or a creature you control, if your opponent has 3 or more mana on their hand, drain 3 mana from your opponent's hand, otherwise your opponent loses 3 life. You think that has some synergy with like Ob Nixilis, but it doesn't, because very rarely is your creatures being attacked. The real point is, at the beginning of your turn, if you control a creature with 2 or more reinforcements, you lose 2 creature reinforcements, then exile this card, create the Argent Etchings token. Her saga has 3 functions. Number 1, create 5 incubator tokens. Those cards gain will counter 2, destroy all incubator tokens you control. 2, your creatures get +X and gain double strike until the end of turn. X is equal to 1 plus the number of their reinforcements. 3, destroy all cards that don't have the artifact, land, or Phyrexian subtypes. Return the first cards named Elesh Norn from your exile to the battlefield under your control. They pretty much all do the same thing. So in this build, I focused on Glistening Dawn to get some more incubator tokens, Sunder the Gateway, Blighted Burgeoning, Unnatural Growth to double the strength of the creatures, Tyvar to give haste, Witch's Web to give some defense against flyers, Void Rend to be able to destroy their opponents, and really the key creature is Galta and Mavrin to be able to put the tokens we want to be able to do on the board, and Gather the Pack in green is necessary to be able to put the creatures, since we're only running 2 creatures, we really need to do what we can to put those creatures in the hand and into the yard so we can start to do the things we want to do. There's a look at the deck, click. Alright, so now the real reason I chose Watley Radiant Champion is because you use her first to get into her ultimate ability, and you really want to do her ultimate. Have a bunch of creatures on the board, draw 2 cards for each creature you control, and gain 8 mana for each creature you control. Something that synergizes well with multiple creatures, and that's why I spotlighted it. So the folks to get as many tokens on the board as possible to trigger the Saga flip. The win con is Galta and Maven. You just want to get the Dinopire out there, and with Unnatural Growth to get it as big as possible so that you can swing for Dome and win the game. Now, the challenges with Elesh Norn is getting and keeping the tokens on the board for the beginning of turn. So bottom line is that you set everything up, and then you give your Greg an entire turn to be able to remove your creatures, and then it delays what you're doing in the process. It really should be an end of turn trigger, not a beginning of turn trigger, but it is what it is. The second challenge I have with this card is there's no real synergy from the first chapter of Saga versus the setup and cost to trigger. In other words, I'm putting tokens on the board, they're taking reinforcements off the board, and then I'm getting 1/1s. Again, the big challenge in Puzzle Quest is 1/1s don't do anything in Puzzle Quest. In Paper Magic, you have 20 life. In Puzzle Quest, we have 5 times that. So for us to have 1/1 token creatures makes no sense. And only 3 creature spaces, there's no point in having a 1/1 creature token. So when we have these creatures at the board, they're not anything that's significant enough to go swing and make an impact in the game. And the final chapter is okay, but again, it impacts your stuff as well. So if you're playing a card like Galta that isn't a Phyrexian, you lose your big boy, and more often than not, you lose the game. There's just no synergy with this card with anything that's in gameplay right now. It's not really designed for Puzzle Quest. It's not impactful to Puzzle Quest. So what's good about the card? Absolutely nothing. This card is awful. My conclusion is it's a shame that the leader of the Phyrexian invasion is such a bad card, but it's not 100% Octi's fault. It kind of sucks in cardboard too. To Oktagon's credit, it is an almost exact port word for word, but in Puzzle Quest, she's as worthless as you can get. It doesn't work in Puzzle Quest. It's strictly a cardboard card. If you compare that to all the other Elesh Norns like Mother Machines or Grand Cenobite, she's by far the worst, and frankly, it's a master and forget this card. you'll never play with it again. At least I won't, for sure. What's my grade on this card? It is an absolute F-. Do not chase this card. If you get it, I'm sorry. All right, moving on. Alright, Vorinclex, 15 mana, legendary, trample, reach, 6/8, green, Phyrexia and Praetor. When this creature enters the battlefield, fetch the first 2 land cards from your library. Those cards gain 5 mana. At the beginning of your turn, if you have 25 or more mana in your hand, you may drain 25 mana from your hand. 25 mana. If you do, exile the card, create the Grand Evolution token. We'll talk about that here in just a second. So, the bottom line here is this card's overall focus is it gets you lands. You don't need 2 different lands. You can have 1 land in deck and it'll fetch 2 of them for you, give them 5 mana. 5 mana is not enough for lands. Typically, the good lands cost 12, so you're just stealing room in your hand. You're thinning your deck a bit to improve your draws, so hopefully you're getting some more impact cards. Frankly, I don't like lands at all right now in Standard. The only cards that are good or that can be functional are the ones that give 5 mana when they hit the board. But in this deck, they didn't work, so I didn't include any lands inside of it. Let's take a look at the Grand Evolution. So the Grand Evolution is destroy the top 10 cards of your library, pick 2 of the last 4 creature cards from your graveyard, move those cards to the battlefield under your control. This is great. This is a really good first chapter. Second chapter, your last 2 creatures get +4/+4. Okay. Your first creature, it's kind of pointless. Your third is your first creature fights target opposing creature. Your second creature fights target opposing creature. Your third creature fights target opposing creature. Return the first card named Vorinclex from your exile to the battlefield under your control. What's good about the third ability is if they have a big creature that's way bigger than yours, your first can fight, your second can fight, and your third can fight that same creature in order to kill it if it's one that needs to go. What really stinks is if it has prevent damage, you got no recourse. This doesn't do anything about that. And between Faithbound Judge and Phyrexian Vindicator, you're really running into some tough spots that this has to deal with. I will say this. I was originally, after my playtesting with this, I really hated this card, and it was fighting for the bottom of the pile. But I then came across this build. Let's take a look at the deck. Atraxa Grand Unifier. This is the fancy version. When this creature enters the battlefield, you get 3 cards. Comes into play or into your hand. And we want to give Remy the ability. Here's the downside to Vorinclex more than anything. He's got reach, so he blocks everything. So he dies typically unless he has some type of PD, which Remy gives him and actually helps the deck out completely. Gather the pack to fetch your cards. Meeting of the 5 is the engine we're running between Tamiyo, Broker's Charm. So we get 2 cards in hand. We really want 2 Tamiyos on the board to fuel the hand. Rob the Archives to speed us along. Our Alchemist Gamut to double strike, and Angel Fire Ignition to gain some life. There's a look at the deck. This Planeswalker that we're going to be using is Domri Chaosbringer. The major card here is Major Hunting Grounds. Support card emblem at the end of your turn. Reinforce your creature. If you can, create a Gruul Beast token. Your creatures with power 5 or greater gain Berserk and Trample. Solid ability, so we want to ramp into our third. So the strategy here is getting a 7 Shield Tamiyo on the board to fuel the hand with all the mana we need to trigger Vorinclex. Typically a 1 of Atraxa that we just pin down at the top of our hand. That way it keeps refilling with mana. Remy on board to keep Vori bulletproof and blocking and fighting for third chapter. And wash, rinse, repeat. Wincon is double striking, first creature reinforcing from Domri's ultimate. The challenge with this deck, high stored mana, 25 is wasted in hand. You're not using it. You could be casting spells. You could be impacting the board. You could be getting creatures on deck to be able to swing for dome and actually win. But you can't. You have to tie it up in hand to be able to functionally cast and flip to get to that first ability. So it's slow to build up the combo without Tamiyo's mana gains in red and green only. So you probably have to run blue in order to run Cut Your Losses. So you could run Sarkhan Unbroken. Otherwise, it's really slow, man. And creatures are exposed on the board while you're trying to store up enough mana, so it leads to removal, and then you have to start over. Oh, it feels bad. And Vorinclex has reach. He blocks and dies everything without prevent damage himself or Remy on the board. So if he's just out there hanging in the wind by himself, I'd highly encourage you get Remy first out, then Vorinclex. That way he's guaranteed FPD, and that way he's not as susceptible. One thing that's very interesting compared to some of the other Praetors, he doesn't have Ward. So some of the other Praetors are a little protected because they have that ward ability, so they can't exactly cast spells at it. They're still susceptible to Planeswalker's abilities, but in this case, he doesn't. And so he's a lot more exposed on the board as a result of it. Now, that said, what's good about the card? Actually, the first chapter allows you to immediately replace the bodies that you're losing for the saga, helping you maintain and grow your board presence, and triggering the enters battlefield effects from Atraxa, and making up slightly for the mana lost in your hand to trigger. So if you get 2 big cards that cost 15 or 25, that's a total of 40 mana that's hitting the board in casting cost for another Vorinclex, which you should get, and an Atraxa, or 2 Atraxas that give you that mana in hand. and that's basically 50 mana you're exchanging for 25 mana in hand. So that's a positive net mana exchange. I hope that makes sense. It cost me 25 in stored mana in hand, but I'm getting 50 mana on board from Atraxa or 40 from Vorinclex. Chapter 3, the second great thing about this is Chapter 3 plus Remy equals a prevent damage fighters. Continue to target the first creature if they need be to get rid of them. So you literally have bulletproof army that's going in and wiping out their side of the board as long as they take damage. If they don't, I would highly encourage switching out Void Ren for Broker's Charm for those folks that are, if you have no other way of dealing with the board presence. Third thing I love about this, big Atraxa doing big things. It is awesome to see your board get really big and go out there and swing for dome and do very, very well. This is a fun deck. It works really, really well, and it's effective. So I actually had a lot more fun than I initially thought with this build, although it's slow and easy to disrupt with removal. Once you get your big stick swinging, it's GG pretty quick. Now that said, the setup can get clunky, and the build overall needs a little tooling. As I mentioned, I would switch out Broker's Charm for Void Rend. But bottom line, when Vorinclex hits and is buffed by Domri's Third, it gets silly really, really fast. Highly, highly recommend. This actually ranked better than I initially play tested. I give it a B- because of its exposure, maybe a C+ in that category, but I had a lot of fun with it. It is fun. Is Vorinclex a chase card? No, but if you get him and you want to play with him, especially if you're a new player, this is kind of the way you want to go with. I'm sure you're not going to have a Atraxa or some of these other cards we have in here, but any enters battlefield impact cards that you have that are creatures, those are the ones you want to focus on. Maybe mana converters or ones that do removal, things of that nature. You have a lot of different options available to you with it. Lots of flexibility in the deck build you could swap stuff out with. And again, if you have blue and or you run green-blue instead, that might give you what you need in order to build out a deck that can take advantage of cut your losses to get the mana gains you need. All right. My friend, this took entirely way too long, so I'm actually just releasing the first part now. I didn't want to leave you hanging for the week, so like, subscribe, do all the things, and I will see you in part 2. What do you think so far of these two? Do you have these two? Do you have a build that works really well? Comment, like, subscribe, get into the Discord. Until our next quest, swords out.